I still remember the crisp night air as vividly as the shock that shattered my world. My wife, Sarah, and I had just returned from our dream honeymoon, a getaway that promised endless love and new beginnings. I had been riding shotgun on what I thought was the road to forever, the rhythmic hum of tires on asphalt echoing the beat of my hopeful heart. That fateful night, however, took an unexpected turn when a simple stop at a Shell gas station became the scene of my worst nightmare. We had been driving through quiet backroads, the stars scattered like diamonds above us, when the neon glow of the gas station beckoned us to refuel. The station, a modest establishment with vintage pumps and a small convenience store, seemed to offer nothing more than a brief respite from our long drive. I stepped out to fill the tank while Sarah went inside to grab a snack and a hot cup of coffee. As I watched the neon sign flicker in the cool night, an inexplicable feeling of unease began to creep over me. I couldn't quite put my finger on it until I saw her, Veronica, leaning casually against the side of the store. Her presence was magnetic and strangely out of place amid the quiet hum of the gas station. I had never noticed her before, yet there she was, exuding an air of mystery and allure. In that moment, I felt a twist in my gut, a premonition that something was amiss. I tried to shake it off as nothing more than my overactive imagination, but as I returned to the car, the memory of her piercing gaze clung to me like a shadow. Back in the car, Sarah's cheerful recount of her brief conversation with the attendant couldn't mask the sudden, unspoken tension between us. I found myself distracted by the image of Veronica, and a nagging suspicion began to surface. The drive resumed, but every mile felt heavier than the last. I replayed the scene in my head, her confident smile, the subtle tilt of her head, as if each detail was a clue to a puzzle I hadn't yet fully grasped. As the night deepened, my mind wandered to fragments of the past, to moments I had overlooked in the hope that our love was unbreakable. There were signs, small instances when Sarah seemed distant, when her phone glowed a little too long in the dark. I had ignored them, choosing instead to focus on the bliss of our honeymoon. Now, each passing minute on that lonely highway seemed to whisper secrets of betrayal. I wrestled with conflicting emotions, anger at the situation I was beginning to suspect, sorrow for the love I thought we shared, and a creeping doubt that gnawed at my heart. The gas station stop, which I had intended as a mere pause for fuel and a warm beverage, had planted a seed of uncertainty that now took root. I remember pulling into a quiet rest area just off the highway to collect my thoughts. The night was silent, except for the distant hum of passing cars and the occasional whisper of the wind. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to make sense of the unease that had taken hold. My mind raced with questions. Had I been too blind to see the signs? Was there more behind that fleeting glimpse of Veronica than mere coincidence? I knew that our honeymoon was supposed to be a time of renewal, a celebration of the future we had planned together. Instead, I now felt the burden of secrets and the chill of betrayal sinking into my bones. That night, the simple act of stopping at a gas station transformed into a turning point, a moment where the promises of a perfect beginning were irreversibly tainted by the shadows of deceit. After that haunting night, the drive home felt endless, a journey steeped in doubt and searing betrayal. The roads, once familiar and comforting, now appeared as a labyrinth of unanswered questions. I couldn't shake the image of Veronica and the weight of suspicion that now pressed on my chest. Every mile I drove, I was haunted by memories of her confident smile and the distant look in Sarah's eyes that night. By the time we reached a small town at dawn, the cold light of morning revealed not only the landscape but also the stark reality that our perfect honeymoon had been compromised. I parked the car outside a modest motel, my mind racing with possibilities. I needed time alone to gather my thoughts before confronting Sarah about the events at the Shell station. In the silence of that lonely motel room, I replayed the night in my head. Each detail, the way the neon sign flickered, the subtle glances exchanged, and the mysterious phone call that had interrupted our brief moment of respite, became a piece of an intricate puzzle I was desperate to solve. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, struggling with a cocktail of anger and sorrow. I recalled small moments from the drive, her text messages left unanswered, the nervous tapping of her fingers against her coffee cup, and began to wonder if I had missed the signs all along. As the hours passed and the morning slowly turned to day, the need for clarity grew overwhelming. I decided that I could no longer bury the rising suspicion. I picked up my phone and reached out to a close friend who had a knack for seeing through facades. Over coffee at a nearby diner, I confided everything: the unsettling encounter with Veronica, the unexplained silence between Sarah and me, and that crushing feeling of betrayal that now clung to my every thought. My friend listened intently, his eyes narrowing with concern as I recounted the night's events. "Sometimes," he said quietly, A single moment can unravel a lifetime of promises. You need to get to the truth, no matter how painful it might be. His words echoed in my mind long after our conversation ended. I realized that if I was to salvage any remnants of the love we once had, I needed to confront the situation head-on. Returning to the motel room that afternoon, I resolved to have a conversation with Sarah, a conversation that would either shatter the last vestiges of my hope or pave the way for an honest reckoning. I found her sitting by the window, lost in thought as she stared out at the awakening town. My heart pounded as I walked over and sat beside her. "Sarah, we need to talk," I began, my voice betraying none of the turmoil roiling inside me. Her eyes flickered with apprehension, and I could see the worry in the way her hands trembled ever so slightly. "I know," she whispered, almost inaudibly. I took a deep breath and recounted everything: the strange encounter at the Shell station, the unsettling phone call, the feeling that something had been off for a long time. With each word, the distance between us seemed to widen, as if the truth was pulling us apart even as I longed to mend what was broken. Sarah's eyes welled with tears, and for a moment, silence reigned between us. "I'm so sorry," she finally managed, her voice laden with regret. She admitted that she'd been distant in recent days, that she'd been grappling with emotions she couldn't easily explain. But before I could press further, the conversation turned into a painful dance of half-truths and broken promises. I pressed her for more, needing to know if the mysterious Veronica was more than just a figment of my suspicion. In that raw moment of vulnerability, Sarah hesitated before confessing that she had met Veronica at the gas station, and that what had begun as a harmless conversation had quickly escalated into something far more dangerous. Her voice trembled as she revealed that a part of her had felt neglected, lost in the excitement of our whirlwind honeymoon, and that she'd sought solace in the company of a stranger. The words hung in the air like shards of glass, each one piercing through the fragile remnant of trust we had built together. My mind raced as I struggled to comprehend the enormity of her betrayal. Anger surged within me, mingling with a profound sense of loss. I recalled all the promises we'd made, the dreams we'd painted in broad strokes, and wondered how easily they could be tarnished by one impulsive decision. The conversation ended with a silent acknowledgement that nothing would ever be the same again. As Sarah retreated into herself, I sat there feeling isolated, caught between the desperate hope for redemption and the crushing certainty that our lives had irrevocably changed. In the days that followed our painful confrontation, the reality of Sarah's betrayal settled over me like a heavy fog. The honeymoon, once a period of bliss and newfound beginnings, had transformed into a series of haunting memories and bitter regrets. Every shared glance, every word of comfort seemed to mock the promises that now lay in ruins. I struggled to reconcile the image of the woman I thought I knew with the stark truth of her actions. Determined to find some semblance of clarity, I sought solitude in long, aimless drives along deserted highways. The open road became my confessional, a place where the hum of the engine and the rhythmic flicker of passing streetlights offered a temporary escape from my inner torment. In those quiet hours, I questioned whether I had been blind to the signs all along. Had I truly seen the subtle indications of her growing distance? The unanswered texts, the fleeting expressions of discontent, they now seemed painfully obvious in retrospect. I immersed myself in memories of our early days together, searching for any hint of forewarning. I recalled how our eyes would light up when we first met, how our laughter filled the room, and how we vowed to face the world as one. It was hard to reconcile that vibrant past with the shadow that now loomed over us. I began to document my thoughts in a battered journal, each entry a raw and unfiltered expression of my grief and confusion. The pages soon overflowed with questions. Could trust ever be rebuilt? Was there any path to forgiveness, or had the wound been too deep to heal? One evening, driven by a need for answers, I decided to confront my own demons by seeking professional help. I arranged to meet with a therapist, a reserved, thoughtful man who specialized in relationship traumas. Over several sessions, I bared my soul, recounting the gas station encounter, the uneasy silence that had followed, and the crushing moment when Sarah's betrayal was laid bare. The therapist's calm, measured responses helped me begin the slow, painful process of unraveling the layers of hurt. He explained that betrayal, however devastating, was often a symptom of deeper emotional disconnects, a call for help that could no longer be ignored. While his words offered little consolation, they provided a framework for understanding the complexity of human relationships, even when marred by deceit. At the same time, I watched as Sarah seemed to withdraw further into herself. Our once lively home had become a silent battleground, each room filled with echoes of what once was. I tried to reach out to her, to open lines of communication that could perhaps mend our fractured bond, but each attempt was met with a painful reticence. In the evenings, as I sat alone in the dark, I found myself grappling with the bitter irony that the woman I loved had, in her moment of weakness, shattered the foundation of our shared dreams. One night, as rain tapped softly on the window pane, Sarah finally approached me with tearful eyes and a fragile apology. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered, her voice quivering with remorse. In that moment, I was torn between a desperate desire to forgive and the searing sting of betrayal that still burned in my chest. I wanted to believe that our love could rise from the ashes, yet the memory of that fateful night at the Shell station, where a single act of infidelity had upended our world, remained an indelible scar. That night marked the beginning of a long and arduous journey, a tentative attempt to rebuild what had been lost. We agreed to attend couples counseling, a joint effort to navigate the turbulent aftermath of deception. In those sessions, we laid bare our innermost fears, our regrets, and our longing for a future that might one day be reconciled with our shattered past. The process was painful, filled with moments of raw honesty and moments of bitter confrontation. I listened as Sarah recounted her feelings of isolation and neglect, while I struggled to articulate the depth of my hurt and betrayal. It was a slow dance of vulnerability and pride, where every word had the potential to heal or further wound. Yet, in the midst of this turmoil, there were fleeting moments of clarity, a shared laugh over a forgotten memory, a brief touch that recalled the intimacy of better times. These moments, though ephemeral, served as reminders of the love that had once bound us together. I clung to them desperately, even as the pain of betrayal threatened to overwhelm me. I began to wonder if, perhaps, this was not the end of our story, but merely a painful chapter, a trial by fire that, if we survived, could forge a deeper, more honest connection. Months passed, and the seasons changed, each day etching new scars and, perhaps, new hopes into our lives. The wound of Sarah's betrayal had not healed overnight, but in the slow cadence of time, I began to see subtle shifts in both of us. Our sessions with the counselor became a lifeline, a space where we could confront our emotions without judgment, where silence could be replaced with tentative dialogue. Though the memory of that dreadful night at the Shell station still loomed large, it was gradually becoming part of a past that we were learning to navigate together. I spent long hours reflecting on the lessons of that tumultuous period, grappling with the profound realization that love is as fragile as it is resilient. I came to understand that the betrayal was not solely about the act itself, but about a failure to communicate needs and emotions that had long been suppressed. It was a harsh awakening, a reminder that even the strongest bonds can fracture under the weight of unspoken grievances. In my journal, I began to write not only of my pain but also of my hopes for redemption, a future where forgiveness might be more than just a word, but a living, breathing process that rebuilt trust brick by brick. Sarah, too, embarked on her own journey of introspection. Slowly, she opened up about the loneliness that had driven her to seek solace elsewhere, the quiet desperation that had made her feel invisible in our once vibrant relationship. As we shared our individual vulnerabilities, the gulf that had once separated us began to narrow. I found myself wondering if the raw honesty that emerged from our darkest moments could, in time, pave the way for something new, a love that was scarred yet genuine, fragile yet fiercely real. One crisp autumn evening, as the amber leaves danced in the fading light, Sarah and I sat together on our back porch, the silence between us now filled with a tentative warmth. We reminisced about the early days of our courtship, the reckless optimism of youth, and the dreams we had once woven together. It wasn't an easy conversation. Each word carried the weight of our shared history, each pause a silent acknowledgement of the pain that had defined the intervening months. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was a glimmer of hope, a possibility that, with time and effort, the wounds of betrayal might eventually mend. That night, as we walked hand in hand along the quiet street, I realized that our journey was far from over. The road ahead was uncertain, littered with the remnants of our past missteps, but it was also illuminated by the promise of new beginnings. I knew that the memory of that fateful night at the Shell station would always be a part of our story, a scar etched deep into the fabric of our lives, but it did not have to define our future. Instead, it could serve as a harsh but necessary lesson in the complexity of love and the courage it takes to rebuild what has been broken. In the end, the betrayal had transformed us both. It had forced me to confront my own vulnerabilities and challenge Sarah to acknowledge the pain she had caused. And though the process was grueling and fraught with setbacks, it ultimately led us to a place of raw, unvarnished truth. As I continue to write my story in the pages of my journal, I hold on to the belief that even in the aftermath of devastation, there lies a possibility for rebirth, a chance to redefine love on our own terms, with scars that serve not as reminders of failure, but as symbols of survival and resilience. Our journey is ongoing, a slow and painful dance between forgiveness and remembrance. The memory of that night, a night marked by a betrayal that upended our dreams, remains etched in my heart. Yet, with every passing day, I find a small measure of solace in the hope that love, no matter how battered, can learn to endure. The road ahead is long, and the path to healing is paved with uncertainty, but I am determined to face it head-on, one honest conversation at a time.